Welcome back to the Orange Couch. My name is Michael Pell, and on my left-hand side is a man who's not only a financial planner, he's a self-managed super fund expert, an SMSF genius, if you will, and with affordability it's on the top of everyone's list. It's getting out of everyone's reach, property prices, Paul Searle. We're going to talk about the option for people to buy in their SMSF today, aren't we?
Mate, I'm glad you're saying all those acronyms. You're saying it a lot better than I am. But yes, we can talk about that.
Welcome to the Orange Couch, and it's a platform for us to talk to anyone and everyone about their story. But with affordability being such an issue, with the recent interest rate rise, we're getting a lot of our clients say, I'd love to add to my property portfolio. Then when we check them with finance, they're maxed out with either their own home and maybe one investment property in their name. This SMSF thing, this buying property with your super is unknown for a lot of us, including me. Maybe you can help debunk and sort of explain how it potentially could work for some people.
Well, there's definitely an opportunity to be able to use your super to fund the deposit that you need, and then also your employer contributions to be able to help subsidise that loan, especially when their property's cash flow negative in the early years until the rent goes up. So you're not having to put your hand into your back pocket.
So really, for people watching this now, they're not putting any of their own savings in. It'd be their super fund covering everything from the deposit on the property and also the cost to set up the super fund?
Absolutely. So there are some added expenses, but as financial planners, when we're doing the modelling for the client, we ensure that the net result puts them in a better position. So even with a few extra expenses, the overall result is better.
Yes.
And most people, we can model out and get a better result. So that's really good.
And of course, it's not the property group like us saying you should buy on your super. We can never say that, and we never would. It'd be people that are interested, Paul, coming over to you as the expert financial planner and SMSF specialist, then doing a statement of advice and going through that process.
Yeah, so before you do anything, you really should get advice. And we go through the whole process with the client, making sure that the strategy is in their best interest and is appropriate for them. So
I think that's important for everyone to understand.
It is important. And prior to that, we actually have an education process that we take the client through. So before they talk to an advisor, they'll actually talk to someone on education, and then they will go to the advisor and then to the statement of advice.
Yep.
So the client will be in a good position to make an informed decision as to whether that strategy is going to suit them.
And of course, for people to understand, your super fund is obviously a separate entity to yourself or mum and dad or whoever the partner's doing this, isn't it? Is it like a company, if you will, as a separate entity?
Yeah, it's like a company or a trust. So it is totally separate to your own affairs. That money, while you will have access to it as a trustee, you only can use it for allowed investments, and it has to stay within that super fund, so you can't go and buy a boat.
No, of course. Yes, and we don't want to be getting loans to buy boats, Paul. We've spoken about that enough.
No. Well, yeah, maybe. But
we should.
I'll let you talk about that.
After you've got a few investment properties. Yeah. But look, it is a thing for anyone listening now, and we've got lots of clients and lots of people that are wanting to build up property portfolio. Maybe you've got a couple in your own name. Maybe you've got your own home you're living in, and maybe you're maxed out in your own names, Paul. The potential here, she might have 100 in her super, he might have 100. Obviously, that's 200 combined. That combined with their incomes may well be enough for them to set up an SMSF and continue expanding their property portfolio.
Absolutely. We see a lot of clients doing that, and providing everything cash flows and it's affordable, and that's what we do as advisors, and then a few other things line up, then it's definitely a strategy that can be deployed to get into another property by using your super.
Yep.
So it's sitting in Sun Super now or Australian Super. You can roll that out, use that money to purchase the property, and then have contributions coming into the super fund along with the rent to help subsidise that loan in the first initial years until the rent goes up.
And which we know rents are going up. I mean, even with the interest rates going up, the overseas migration's coming back now post-COVID, Paul. There's been a shortage of housing through COVID, through the floods, through the weather on the eastern seaboard especially. So, vacancy rates, properties available for rent are at record lows. There's a huge shortage. So as an investor watching this, to consider that super fund move may well be the way forward. And I think the big thing to make it relatable for everybody is that you're not dipping into your own savings. You don't need to even pay for the setup of the super fund, but then you're not putting in any money for the deposit. It's the super fund covering all of it, isn't it?
Yeah, look, there's some captive money there that you can deploy to purchase property. So for some people, it can be a really good strategy, and the clients that obviously we recommend that they do it. It is a really good strategy for them.
And is there a minimum amount that you would need in your super fund or in yourself and your partner's super fund to be able to consider it?
There's no real minimum, but it comes down to practicality. So you need to be able to have enough to be able to purchase a property. So you need to have enough deposit and then still some money left over. We like to see some liquidity in the fund.
And do we like a 10% deposit, 20% deposit, or is that more of a finance question?
Look, from a financial planning point of view, I prefer at least a 20% deposit and a bit more.
Safer.
Yeah, just to take some of the heat out of the transaction, take some of that risk out. So you can leverage more, but generally my advice is when I see clients is that we just have a smaller loan than perhaps we normally would if we're buying it outside.
It's safer. And obviously you've got the super fund with its contributions coming in. So there's income there. There's income from the purchase, so the investment property, the rental income. But obviously there's the income of the people as well that gets factored in for the servicing. All of those incomes?
For the loan?
Yeah.
Not so much, well, indirectly the income of the individuals will get factored in because that directly relates to the amount of contributions that they've got coming in.
Of course.
Yeah, so the higher income, the better this is going to be for you because you're going to have more coming into super. So there's a whole lot of factors that we need to consider when we're providing advice to the client. But generally, what we're talking about now is, look, you can use your super to invest in property and you don't have to dip into your back pocket if you don't need to.
So say you're self-employed and you haven't been paying yourself enough super, could you make some contributions in to get it to the required levels?
Yeah, you could definitely do some lump sum contributions and we'd look at that for you with the tax implications and make sure it's the right thing to do. The only thing you would have to consider is talk to the broker to make sure that you're still able to get finance if you just do a lump sum.
Yes.
Because sometimes a broker likes to see consistent contributions coming in before they'll give that finance.
And what type of properties are allowable to be purchased through super? Am I right in saying you can't do renovations, you can't do
you can't really change the principal use of the property. I mean, you can put some paint on it or tidy it up, some new carpets, but you couldn't say, oh, we're going to put in another bathroom or something like that.
It's buying it as is, one contract.
That is important, one contract, so you can't have two.
So no house and land, for example?
No house and land. The builder or whoever you're buying the property off has to give you a single contract that includes the land and the property.
Does it need to be new or could it be established?
Doesn't have to be new.
Okay.
It can be established, and second-hand property is a way that a lot of clients are looking at as well because they don't have to wait for the build time.
Say they bought into second-hand property, Paul, and then they had some maintenance issues and they needed to spend $10,000 on a year or two on the roof. How could that? Does the super fund pay for that?
The super fund pays for that.
Okay, and that's perfectly fine.
Perfect. There are some rules around it, but if you had a tin roof and it was rusty and you replace it with a tin roof, you're good to go. Super fund can pay for it.
It's very interesting. And look, as we said earlier on, affordability is such a thing now. We're even finding that house prices, I mean, the median house price for Australia is up close to 800,000, in the high 700s. The median house price for apartments is in the 500s. So sometimes apartments are good options here for super funds because they also give a higher yield, Paul, don't they?
Look, and I like yield from a financial planning perspective.
Cash flow.
It's cash flow and yield you can spend now. That's cash in the bank, that's yours to keep. Whereas capital gain, you only realise it when you sell it.
Is the never, never land, potentially.
Potentially. So
nice to look at on paper.
Yeah, and capital gain will provide you with the most return, but it's in 10 years' time, for example. Whereas yield is right now. You can use that money, you can invest the surplus, you pay down the loan.
Pay down the loan. I think it's important. Question, speaking of that, does a super fund loan, we're doing principal and interest, you as the planner would probably prefer that, would you?
That's right.
Than interest only?
I don't like interest only.
You want to pay it down.
I want to see a gap between what the property's worth and what the super fund owes.
Yes, of course, and it's safer. And then, of course, as part of the financial planning process, you'd be looking at diversification for the client into other assets as well. Whatever you would advise in that statement of advice, is that right?
Absolutely. So we'll advise on the share component and then also on the cash component. We've got a neat little mortgage fund. We've got a really good way of investing into shares. So we'll be able to demonstrate to the client through our advice process that the combination of the property, the shares and the mortgage fund will outperform what they're currently doing now. So we'll be able to show that. Because if we can't...
It's important to note that you wouldn't be pulling them out of their own situation now if it wasn't a better scenario with the SMSF.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we can't, through the proposed strategy, demonstrate that we can have a better result, then why would you do it?
Of course.
And that includes taking into account the additional fees that may be there. So, but of course there's some additional risks because now we're going from a non-leverage model to a leverage model. But we explain that to the client and make sure they're comfortable. So if they're not comfortable, then we also don't proceed.
Yeah.
So there's a bit to go before we go, let's just set up a super fund and buy property.
There's a process and there's, as you say, education.
Education and it's not for everyone. So we sit in front of clients and there's a few that just go, look, I don't think this is appropriate for you.
Good.
Or we've done the cash flows and it's just too tight.
Doesn't work now.
It's going to put you under too much stress. I recommend that you don't do it.
Maybe revisit it in a year or two or three.
Revisit it, that's fine. So it's not for everyone, but for the people that it does work, it's a crack of a strategy.
I mean, for us sort of lay people, non-numbers people, if you're getting a 5 or a 6% rental return, and we are from some of our apartments, and you're borrowing the money at, say, 3%, even if rates go up 3.5%, 4%, there's still some buffer, there's some cash flow there to cover costs. It still adds up. And then any capital growth that we talked about is a bonus in 10 years, right, Paul?
Yes, yeah.
So we're paying it down with your super contributions and the rental income. Is that right?
Absolutely. And that leverage model, all things being equal, will always outperform the non-leverage model. So
because you're able to put more dollars in.
That's right. So you got to, instead of having a rate of return on 200,000, you got a rate of return on 400,000, for example. And we explain all this to the clients through the education process and then when they see the financial planner so that they understand why they're doing it. So we're not pro-property, we're pro-shares.
No.
We're pro getting the best result for the client with the tools that we have. The fact that we can leverage property inside super gives it a head start.
And it's all about diversification, like any portfolio, right? So some property's going to help balance out a total portfolio that might be in other assets.
Yeah, look, realistically though, when you clients do the property strategy, they usually have a lack of diversification from the start because a lot of their money's tied up in the property. But that dilutes over time.
Yep.
And also there is an argument for not having heaps of diversification because if you buy well and you make sure you can manage those risks through, it's better than having diversified over everything.
Of course.
Diluting those returns. So there's pros and cons.
He who chases 2 rabbits catches none, Paul.
Who said that? You?
Stay in your lane. Well, you're right. If you are on a good thing and the investment is working, maybe add that to your portfolio. But very, very interesting. I mean, you can be buying property with none of your own cash using your super. You can create a super fund. Obviously, you might have your own, you might have yours and your partner's. Can a couple of brothers do it? Can a couple of friends do it? Can mum and dad do it with me?
Absolutely. It's the thing that you need to look out for. A couple of things is, one, the relationship side of things. When you're tied into an SMSF that's got combined members buying a property, you guys need to be able to get on in the future. So you have to give consideration to that. So there was one other thing I've forgotten.
While you're on that, I was watching, it might have been a current affair today, tonight. I forgot to change it over to Channel 2 before I watched the news. Last night, there's a new app coming out because affordability is such an issue. There's a new app coming out that credit checks and reference checks and identity checks people. The investors saying, hey, I want to buy an investment property, but I can't afford one myself. So effectively what it does is it matches up like-minded investors to purchase property. And then you had the solicitors on saying, hey, that's high, high risk because you don't know the person. But there's all these apps coming out now to help with this affordability thing. Yeah. This could be a situation where you can go to someone that you know and trust and set up the super fund together and do it like that. Yeah. Instead of someone unknown.
Or if you've got enough to have a super fund in your own right, and then you've got friends or family or associates that have enough to set up a super fund in their own right. A better way of doing it would be to put the property into a unit trust, have that unit trust borrow the funds, and have those super funds invest into that unit trust. And we have a really neat way of doing that, maybe a conversation for another day.
Yes.
But what that allows is people with, say, a lower balance, maybe $200,000-300,000, that can't get into, say, $1 million property. By combining those funds, you can get into the $1 million property, and potentially, you're the property expert, maybe that $1 million property might have better prospects than a $400,000 property. So
interesting. We do talk about that a lot.
Yeah.
You know, normal clients would come to us, non-SMSF people, and say, hey, I've got $800 to spend. Am I buying 2 at $400 or 1 at $750, $800? And our recommendation is all the time, let's get one more premium property in a better area that's going to appreciate quicker, attract better tenants, versus, let's be real, a lot of property groups would recommend the 2 for obvious reasons because there's 2 transactions. But it's important to always act in the best interest of the client. We're of the belief that one more premium property is always better, Paul.
Well, if you've got that premium property and we have groups of clients that want to invest in that, we can aggregate their funds. We can also borrow through the unit trust and allow those clients to have exposure to a far better property, at least in your opinion, than a cheaper property.
Well, hopefully we've opened up your eyes and ears today. Paul Searle from Ascendancy Planning, who is a financial planning expert and SMSF expert, also an accountant too, but we're focusing on the SMSF stuff, aren't we?
We are.
If you hadn't thought about an SMSF purchase or buying extra properties in your SMSF, contact us today. Paul Searle and his team would be happy to help. Thanks for joining us on the Orange Couch, Paul.
Thank you, Michael. Appreciate it. Thanks for your time.
Back soon on the Orange Couch.